If it's Wednesday, outrage from Democrats and Republicans as new ethics concerns and legal questions loom over Hunter Biden, former President Trump, and Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. Plus, America just got a dismal report card. Student test scores plunged in both math and reading, in the clearest sign yet of the pandemic's lingering impact on the U.S. education system. And the desperate deep sea search for that missing submersible lost deep underwater with 5 people on board and just hours left of breathable air. The Coast Guard says they are not giving up on trying to rescue these folks. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd, reporting from Washington, and we begin today with the questionable state of political ethics and accountability in America. You'd be forgiven for not knowing which ethical or legal issue I'm referring to. Is it today's new reporting about Justice Samuel Alito's luxury vacation on a private jet with a billionaire who eventually had business before the court? That one has Democrats outraged. Or is it Hunter Biden's expected guilty plea deal on misdemeanor tax charges? That one has now Republicans up in arms. Is it the special counsel John Durham testimony on Capitol Hill about the origins of the Russian probe? It's a moment House Republicans have been eagerly awaiting and promoting. Or is it the New York Times new reporting that the former president, Donald Trump, has a lucrative business deal with Oman's government and using a Saudi government-connected real estate firm while he's running for president? The answer is all of them. Let's start on Capitol Hill, where former special counsel Durham answered lawmakers' questions about his 4-year investigation into the FBI's decision to open an investigation examining the Trump campaign's relationship with various Russian interlopers, if you will. The report was critical of the FBI and DOJ for their methods of intelligence gathering in the Russian probe. But it was not a smoking gun on the Russian probe itself that some Republicans had promised and have somehow read this report and have tried to declare anyway. Take a listen to Durham himself today.
I would like to add that although our work exposed deep concerns concerning facts about the conduct of these investigations, our report should not be read to suggest in any way that Russian election interference was not a significant threat. It was. Nor should it be read to suggest that the investigative authorities at issue no longer serve important law enforcement and national security interests. They do.
Republicans today reiterated their arguments that the Russian probe was a political hit job against the Trump campaign, ignoring obvious things like Paul Manafort, an agent, if you will, an unconfirmed agent of a Russian oligarch, being the campaign manager. And it comes as Republicans are also accusing the Department of Justice of giving Hunter Biden a sweetheart deal, after we learned yesterday that President Biden's son, Hunter, has made a deal to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges to avoid further prosecution. Of course, all of it is at a time when the Justice Department is seeking serious charges against the presidential frontrunner of the Republican Party, Donald Trump. So it may be shocking to realize this, but 2 individuals from different parties could be facing charges at the same time. For Democrats today, the ethics issue they're outraged about has nothing to do with Hunter Biden or John Durham. It is Justice Samuel Alito and his unique response to ProPublica's reporting about his undisclosed trip with a Republican donor who had cases before the court. Alito decided to write an op-ed denying that he was friends with the donor and going as far to say is that he flew on the private jet because there was, quote, empty seat. He made this denial before the initial story actually was reported, for what it's worth. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is actively cutting new business deals with the country of Oman and the country of Saudi Arabia, while he's been pushing unsubstantiated attacks on Biden family business deals with overseas folks. So how did we get here? There's no doubt this ethical crisis has been mounting for years, if you will. The distrust across the political spectrum certainly has contributed to it. But our level of partisanship has been a dose of rocket fuel to all of it. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is Ali Vitale. Also with me, Andrew Weissman, former FBI special counsel and an NBC News legal analyst. Ali, let me start with you. And I guess the question was, did we really hear from John Durham today, or did we hear from elected members of the House giving their views of what John Durham said, and at times not allowing John Durham to speak for John Durham?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Chuck, especially because this could have been a hearing where Republicans were able to make a smoking gun, but Durham certainly stuck to the report, which wasn't that. I mean, this is what it sounded like. Watch just a piece of it.
Trump, despite having no true
Clinton campaign operatives in contact with Russian intelligence sources.
That's beyond the scope of our report.
That based on the investigation into the conduct and the continuous disregard for duty, there was obviously a special motivation to find this suspect, Donald Trump, and his campaign guilty above anyone else. Would you agree?
I can speak to what the facts show, as documented in the report. Again, people draw their reasonable inferences, conclusions from those facts.
So, Chuck, you had Republicans trying to be the flamethrowers there, teeing Durham up for answers that he didn't flamethrow back on. And then, of course, you had Democrats trying to extract their own answers. For example, one of them asking Durham, did the DOJ at any point stand in the way of you trying to subpoena or get in touch with anyone during the course of your investigation? Durham said no. And so, again, both sides sort of sticking to their talking points here. But this was not the event that I think Republicans might have wanted it to be. And certainly, as I talked to some of the members going into that room, too, they weren't all fully aligned on John Durham as the savior of this theory that they've held for years. Some of them even thought he was in on it, like Matt Gaetz.
Well, I saw that. I mean, it just sort of goes to the absurdity of what I don't know if what Durham had to say was the point of today's hearing. They just wanted the hearing to create the illusion that other stuff was said. Let me ask you about some other sort of sideshows in the House of Representatives today. Impeachment votes, censuring votes, none of which will probably have any bite to it. But where do those things stand?
Well, look, I think these are the votes that become really politically tough for moderate members of Congress, especially when you look at, for example, the Republicans in New York who helped make the majority party here. Some of them, when they were asked about this latest push to impeach the president by people like Lauren Boebert and others, some of them just simply said to reporters, don't talk to me. They do not want to engage. This does not play well for them back home. And you're even seeing it from the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. While he has been full-throated in his support of his members for investigating Hunter Biden, going after and through the panel of weaponization of government, red meat for the base. On this, he is not in alignment with his party, effectively telling them that this is too soon a move. Instead, they should continue moving forward with investigations at the committee level in places like the Oversight Committee, and then they can see if there's something impeachable. So even McCarthy's saying he wants to hold this at arm's length, at least for now. Right.
Well, there's a faction of the House Republicans that, like anything Democrats did to Trump, they want to do to Biden, a hard stop. So Democrats impeach Trump. They believe they have to impeach Biden. I'll be very curious to see if they get a majority vote for that at some point. Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill today. Ali, thank you. Let me bring in Andrew Weissman. He, of course, was part of the Mueller probe during the investigation. But I want to emphasize, you were not there at the start of this investigation. And in many ways, what Durham was probing, you were brought in after Comey got fired and after Mueller was named and all of that. In reading the Durham report and his recommendations of reforms and sort of how things got started, what do you think was fair game that he pointed out?
I think that what was fair was something that had already been pointed out by the Inspector General, and he reiterated, which was that there were real substantial flaws in the way that the FBI and the Department of Justice put together the application to get a warrant for various people who are under investigation. And that for the most serious thing was that they could have figured out, and certain people were aware of what's called exculpatory evidence. In other words, evidence that countered things that they were setting forth to the court. And that is just, bad practice. That has to be fronted to the court. And I think that was the most serious flaw that the FBI and the Department of Justice engaged in.
Sometimes I feel like we dance around what was at issue here. What is at issue was the relevance of the Steele dossier. And the Steele dossier, which, by the way, people like John McCain and Lindsey Graham sort of brought into the mainstream. Lindsey Graham may forget that sometimes, but it was brought into the mainstream. And it does seem as if it was used a lot more by the FBI in the early stages as a justification than it ever was by you and Director Mueller.
Well, for the Mueller investigation, it had no relevance. I mean, it's not evidence. For instance, it has nothing to do with Paul Manafort and his being guilty and a jury finding him guilty and his admitting that he was guilty. Same thing for Rick Gates. Same thing for George Papadopoulos. In other words, there are numerous people who either pled guilty, in other words, admitted their guilt themselves out of their own mouths, or who juries found were guilty, like Roger Stone, who was found guilty by a jury. So the Steele dossier even is irrelevant to why they opened the investigation. I mean, there was, to my mind, and again, I wasn't there, but when I look at the evidence, I think it would have been a dereliction of duty not to look at the issue when you had a foreign country providing information that was quite serious. And remember, Donald Trump was not the target of that investigation. It was about whether there was foreign interference and anybody in the United States who was assisting with that foreign interference in an American election. That should have been a bipartisan and still should be a bipartisan concern to people in this country.
So the big thing we've heard this week is this idea that there's a two-tier justice system, pointing to the criminal indictment of Donald Trump and the plea deal of Hunter Biden. Is this an example of, well, if you cooperate with the Justice Department, you can get a plea deal, and if you don't, you don't? Or do any of these Republican critics at all, if you look at this Hunter Biden plea deal, do they have any standing whatsoever?
So it's really good I love the way you're asking this question, because it's great to take the temperature down. First, there's no question that if you plead guilty, you get a better deal. That is the way the sentencing guidelines work in federal court. So for Hunter Biden, he is going to get a better offer because he pleads. Donald Trump, as is his right, is decided not to plead. But, if he had decided to plead guilty, he potentially could have gotten the same kind of very lenient deals that somebody like General Petraeus got. But he didn't go that route, and that's his right not to go down that road. The other is that it's really important to remember who made the decision with respect to Hunter Biden. It was made by a Trump appointee. And people can say that there were Democratic senators who approved it, but it just, to me, that's sort of really not getting to the heart of the issue. The whole reason that Merrick Garland left this in the hands of the U.S. attorney who was appointed by Donald Trump was to try and blunt this kind of politicization of the decision. And I have to say, just as somebody who's been in the department for over 20 years, these kinds of cases are really not routinely prosecuted. So it's just impossible to look at this and say this is a sweetheart deal. You may disagree and think that people should be treated harsher overall, but he is not being treated better than other people who are similarly situated.
Andrew, I'm guessing you believe that the Justice Department in general has taken an unfair beating overall, that the reality versus perception don't square. But the fact of the matter is we have a massive perception problem, in fairness, with the Justice Department. What's a realistic reform to fix this in your mind?
Well, just to be clear, I do think that, and I have said that I think the department has been slow to investigate the January 6th events other than the foot soldiers. Although I have to say, even on January 6th, I thought that the FBI and the department were not where they should have been. So even then, they were slow to sort of be at the ready. I think that one of the things that the department can do is, I do think that they should speak more about what they are doing in terms of it being consistent with their prior practice. For instance, when Donald Trump was charged, there would be nothing wrong with not talking about why he's guilty. That's something that violates due process. You don't want to emulate Jim Comey and what he did with Hillary Clinton. That's that's what you don't want to do. But what you can do is talk about all the other cases that have been brought in similar situations or in situations that were less egregious, and just make sure that the American people understand that he's not being treated better or worse.
Educate them on the whole thing. Like anything, we need nuance and context, and our current media ecosystem does not reward either. Andrew Weissman, I reward nuance and context. That's why you're here. Good to see you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much.
Let me turn now to more on that ProPublica story. Justice Samuel Alito reportedly flew to an Alaskan fishing vacation on the private jet of hedge fund billionaire Paul Singer, who's had his own business before the court. Now, Alito does not deny those claims, but he says there is no reason for him to disclose the trip or recuse himself from any case involving Singer. All of this comes after multiple ProPublica stories on Justice Clarence Thomas's financial relationship and private vacations with Republican donor Harlan Crow. And joining me now is Justin Elliott. He's one of the reporters on that byline. He covers politics and government accountability for ProPublica. So, Justin, let me start with just your history as a reporter. I mean, in many ways, if I had somebody I was trying to get a response from decide to publish their response somewhere else, I guess the good news would be, okay, I'm on to something. They feel the need to respond. You ever had a relationship with a subject like that before?
Not really. And, like a lot of news organizations, we have what we call a no surprises rule, which is either in an interview or in writing, we like to put everything that we're thinking about reporting in front of a subject. And that's what we did with Justice Alito last week. We asked for an interview, sent a long list of questions over to the Supreme Court press office. And we were told by the court's chief spokeswoman Tuesday around noon that he wasn't going to be responding. And then, 6 or 7 hours later, I looked at my phone and saw that I was being accused by Justice Alito of being misleading in the story that we hadn't actually published yet. So
I'm curious.
We were very interested to see. We were very interested to see, his substantive response, which was, did engage with our questions.
It did seem. I was just going to, but before I get to the specific questions you asked him, I am curious. Did you go back to the spokesperson for the Supreme Court and ask them, did you intend to mislead us that there was going to be no response?
That conversation hasn't happened yet. We published around midnight last night. It was a long day, and I've been busy today. But I would like to have that conversation.
Right, because did Justice Alito mislead his communication shop, or did they mislead you on that front? And again, I think for all of us, that's these are important distinctions, because you want to know, can you deal with the Supreme Court communications shop on the up and up going forward?
Absolutely. And, I've only been covering the court for probably 6 months now. I've, a lot of years covering Congress, writing about the executive branch. One of the kind of strange things that I haven't fully got my head around about the Supreme Court is there's 9 justices, and presumably sometimes their interests are the same and sometimes they diverge, but there's only one press office.
Right.
And it's quite opaque how that works, what role the press office is playing versus the individual justices' chambers.
Right.
So like a lot of things about the Supreme Court, as I've learned in recent months, it's a bit of a black box.
Yes, it is. I think only the conclave in the Vatican is more mysterious to us reporters than the Supreme Court these days. Let me ask about the specific questions you asked of Justice Alito and what he answered. Based on his op-ed, did he attempt to respond to every question you asked, or were there some that he just did not respond to at all?
I would say he responded to most of them, but not all of them. I mean, I think there were several categories. One was just the facts of this luxury fishing vacation, his travel on the private jet provided by Paul Singer, the hedge fund billionaire. And really almost none of the facts are in dispute, which Justice Alito's op-ed made clear. What he is contesting is the legal requirement to disclose this private jet trip, and then also the question of whether he should have recused himself. It didn't answer some of our questions that were kind of more about politics. One of the characters in our story was Leonard Leo, longtime Federalist Society executive that we reported had actually secured Justice Alito's seat on Paul Singer's private jet. Paul Singer, a donor to Leo's groups. And Justice Alito did not engage at all with our questions about his relationship with Mr. Leo. But in terms of the main thrust of the story, which was this recusal issue and the disclosure issue, he did.
So is this a case where he can claim to be technically accurate about the disclosure issue? Because there is no disclosure requirements for Supreme Court justices. Or do you believe he did violate what loose guidelines there are?
Yeah, well, he's making an argument. We've talked to probably 7 or 8 ethics lawyers now, people that have served in, administrations of both parties. And it turns out that one of the few laws that actually does apply to the Supreme Court justices was passed back in the 70s after Watergate. It's called the Ethics in Government Act. And it does require disclosure of most gifts. I mean, unlike a lot of other federal employees, there's very few restrictions on what gifts they can accept.
Right.
But they do have this disclosure requirement in the law. Justice Alito's op-ed did not actually engage with the text of the statute, but instead said that he was interpreting the judiciary's filing instructions, right. Which and that was sort of what his argument centered on. We talked to some of our ethics experts who disagreed with him, and I'll also just point out that, and we linked to this in the piece, there was many federal judges over the years, again, appointed by presidents of both parties, have disclosed private jet trips as gifts. So this is something that certainly some judges were doing.
And is this a beat now for ProPublica to go at this issue of how the Supreme Court justices conduct business in Washington? Is this something that just sort of, as you reported on one, others came through? How organic versus how much this is a beat?
Yeah, well, I spent the last few years before this covering taxes and sort of tax avoidance strategies by the rich. And then I was put on our democracy team. And of course, you can, as a reporter, if they say go cover democracy, you can pretty much do whatever you want. And my colleague Josh Kaplan and I, who's one of the other reporters on this, we actually originally set out to cover the judiciary more broadly. We were, we're very interested in the appellate courts, state Supreme Courts, and we ended up getting this line on Supreme Court justices' travel. It was not something we intended to make into a beat, but it sort of snowballed since we started reporting on Justice Thomas. And I think what we've realized is that some of the same ways that we've covered Congress and political campaigns, that's not always the reporting that happens on the Supreme Court, because there's so much other important, there's so many other important things to cover about the court, the cases, which is, of course, an important beat. So at this point, it's a beat, but we didn't set out for it to be a beat.
Well, look, I mean, Congress didn't start to have any of these kind of disclosure laws and use laws and all this stuff until the mid to late 90s, after abuses were surfaced by professional reporters. Justin Elliott of ProPublica. Justin, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Coming up, clash of the presidents. President Biden facing fierce backlash from Beijing after he called President Xi Jinping a dictator just days after his top diplomat went to China in a high-stakes effort to turn down the temperature between the two superpowers. Plus, another election night, another sign that being against abortion rights spells trouble at the ballot box, particularly on the left, just as the nation prepares to mark the one-year anniversary of the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. You're watching Meet the Press Network. Welcome back. A day after a very highly choreographed trip by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, where he did get to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping, where they pledged to stabilize relations. Tensions between Washington and Beijing are once again heating up. Just 24 hours after what seemed like a successful, cleared a very low bar type of trip for Blinken. During a fundraising event in California last night, President Biden called China's president, quote, a dictator, and suggested Xi was embarrassed by the spy balloon incident from earlier this year. Now, the Chinese decided to be outraged because their response was swift. A spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs called Biden's remarks, quote, extremely absurd and irresponsible, and accused the U.S. president of violating diplomatic protocol. Ironically, some Republicans were quick to chime in with support of Biden, with the top-ranking Republicans on the House and Senate Foreign Relations Committees affirming Biden's comments last night and encouraging him not to walk it back. Joining me now is Kayla Tausche from the White House. And Kayla, I really think the focus of this story needs to be on the Chinese making a decision to be outraged. We all know political leaders around the world talk domestic politics and do these things. We at times respect it when we want to. We get outraged when we want to from another leader. The Chinese looked like they were looking for a reason to be outraged, and they chose to go after this. Why?
Well, that remains to be seen, Chuck. I mean, you saw the swift response on camera from the spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry of China, but there are also signs that they want to try to bury this story. And that's the fact that if you go to the website of the Foreign Ministry, there's a transcript that is provided for these daily press briefings every single day. But the transcript for today's briefing cuts off after 2 questions, and it doesn't include in writing the response to any of the questions that were asked about President Biden's comments. So on one hand, you do have them speaking out on camera, making these very sharp comments, mincing no words whatsoever when it comes to responding. But on the other hand, trying to essentially sweep it under the rug and hope that you can't access a transcript easily to be quoting from unless you were watching it live when it happened.
Kayla, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, he's not the first American president to refer to the leader of China as a dictatorship. Is he not?
He's not, but it's not generally accepted principles for at least U.S. presidents who are trying to have active diplomatic relations with leaders. I mean, certainly it's not something that President Biden, who has been suggested by sources to be trying to plan a trip later this year, perhaps on the sidelines of APEC, which is going to take place in California, or another multilateral summit, a meeting in person. I mean, certainly if you were trying to put a meeting like that in the works, this is not a comment that you would want to be making. But that being said, I mean, it's unclear exactly how many feathers it's going to ruffle and for how long, Chuck. When I talked to one China expert, they called it vintage Biden and said, you know, the president is known for saying things like this and then having his advisors walk it back, for instance.
But are we going to get a walk back?
I don't think so. And at this point, it seems like walking it back might do more harm than good. I mean, you'll remember the times that he said that the U.S. would defend Taiwan militarily. Jake Sullivan and other NSC officials walked that back. The president was angry about it. And then, of course, there was the instance of the Chinese spy bases where the NSC did not said that essentially the story was wrong before it came out. And so there are many instances of, you know, a little bit of muddiness when it comes to U.S.-China policy. And it's unclear exactly whether they're going to have to do any cleanup here.
It's fascinating. They don't care what we think. They apparently just care what we say. Kayla Tauscher reporting for the White House for us. Kayla, thank you. After the break, we have the very latest on the frantic mission to find that missing submersible after rescuers detected underwater noises in the search area. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The Coast Guard today is insisting that the frantic search for the missing submersible of Titanic crash tourist is still a search and rescue mission. Moments ago, the U.S. Coast Guard said they now estimate that the submersible will run out of its oxygen supply by Thursday at approximately 7 o'clock in the morning. They actually gave a specific time of 7:08. I think we should probably better off saying around 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. More than 2 days since the submersible lost contact with its research vessel, rescuers are expanding their search to more than twice the size of the state of Connecticut and up to 2.5 miles deep. Joining me now is Ron Allen. He's in St. John's, Canada, about 400 miles southeast of the search area, but it's as close as we can get him right now. So, Ron, these stories of they hear something, have they even been able to confirm that what they're hearing underwater has anything to do with the submersible?
No. The short answer is no. They say what they're hearing is inconclusive, and they're having experts analyze it. One official said there's a lot of sounds in the sea, there's a lot of things happening, and they're not sure that there's any connection to the submersible. It may be, it may not. They say that there were sounds heard detected by a plane flying over that dropped sonar buoys sometime early today and yesterday. So the timeline timeline for when this happened is even a little bit vague. But no, they have not made a direct connection. They have adjusted the search area to account for that because that's the best lead they have at this point.
So, Ron, they don't believe that this submersible ever made it to the Titanic site, right? I would assume that's where they began their search.
Right, but the problem is getting down there. It's 2.5 miles down, and there's not a lot of equipment in the world that can do that. And that's why there's some anticipation that a French ship that's arriving this evening, we understand, has a very high-tech, advanced robotic system that can go down to that depth even more so and take a look around and see what's there. It's unclear whether that device then has the ability to secure a rope or whatever you would to something in there and pull it up. That's another potential problem that we've been hearing officials talk about. So now that seems to be the focus. There are more ships arriving that have sonar capability, the ability to see deeper into the ocean, and these remotely operated vehicles that can basically go deeper. Our colleague Tom Costello is reporting that the U.S. Navy has said that they can only go down 3,000 feet, and the Titanic is at, 13,000 feet.
And how many times had this submersible successfully done this trip? Only twice?
I believe it is a very limited number, yes. That's something that we've been trying to get a handle on.
Yeah.
We heard from the CEO of this company right over here, Horizon Maritime, which is the ship that took the submersible out, and he was asked about all these reports about the safety record of Ocean Gate, and he said that it's a well-run company and that their safety record is fine. Although that's not what we're hearing from some other experts who are very critical of it. It's a very advanced, cutting-edge company that's and the device, the vessel may not have been approved and regulated by a lot of authorities. But so a lot of questions about that. But bottom line, the search continues.
Yeah, there's a lot of opaqueness about this company, that's for sure. Ron Allen. As close as we can get you off the coast in Canada. Ron, thank you. Up next, a longtime lawmaker and self-described pro-life Democrat just lost his primary race in Virginia. What it means for 2024 and beyond next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Ahead of the anniversary of the Dobbs decision, Democrats are pushing a series of messaging bills around abortion, including around the protections for abortion providers, travel for abortion care, and contraception. Democrats nationally are hoping that abortion will be as motivating of an issue for its voters in 2024 as it appeared to be in 2022. Take a listen to Senator Patty Murray from earlier today.
Last November, in every single place abortion rights were on the ballot, abortion rights won. Americans do not want politicians making health care decisions for them, and they want their fundamental rights and freedoms to be protected, not taken away. We're going to see this week if any of our Republican colleagues have been listening.
All of this comes as Virginia's legislative primaries provided even more evidence of the potency of the issue, and certainly now there is a stark divide between the two parties. The Democratic incumbent for a Richmond area state Senate seat, who has opposed abortion rights for years, was ousted by his primary challenger, who made the support of abortion rights the centerpiece of her campaign. I'm joined now for today's panel, White House correspondent for Politico, co-author of Playbook, Eugene Daniels, senior opinion writer for the Boston Globe, and an NBC News political analyst, Kimberly Atkins-Storr, and Republican strategist Jim Dornan, who is the living and breathing Mark Twain quote. Right, my friend? The rumors are just that. He is right here and in great shape. Mr. Daniels, let me start with you. To me, the big thing I took away from Virginia is you cannot, if you're not, that the abortion politics now, you're either fully pro-life or fully for access. Any sort of deviation within your own party and you're in trouble.
Yes, there's no room for error on this for these.
There's no more nuance on either side.
It doesn't work after Roe goes away, right? One, the Republican Party is still struggling to figure out what the right message is, right? You see how that's working out in the primary, where you have people like Mike Pence talking about a national abortion ban, and then you have Donald Trump kind of waffling as he does, the kind of saying, I'll do whatever ends up better. But on the Democratic side, there is no room, and because they have realized for the first time that abortion is actually something that sends people to the polls, and the idea of the courts and Supreme Court sends people to the polls, and they are using all of those tools, finally, after years of not doing that.
Are we going to put into, are the following two groups of people extinct, pro-life Democrats and pro-choice Republicans?
I think so, because I think what has happened is people have seen the impact of some of these restrictive laws and how it affects people, how it could affect people. Not just, they don't think of abortion in the same way that they did before. They see it as health care. They see it as incomplete miscarriages and how these laws can affect people. So that is why it's not just that there aren't any room, there's no room within the party. Within the electorate broadly, it is largely pro-choice, and so there's really no place to go.
Jim, you have lived your life in getting Republicans elected in blue states, which means you've worked for a lot of Republicans who have been, you know, say, well, you know, I'm pro-life on this, but I believe in these exceptions and all that stuff. Can you get a Republican like that elected right now?
Probably not now, and the advantage the Democrats have right now is that they lost. They lost last summer, and now it's easier to create that argument and that fight. And Republicans
the same way it was the other way around.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
The pro-life community, hey, we lost Roe v. Wade, and we're going to win.
It changes the total dynamic of who you're talking to and what you're saying to them.
When does the Republican Party, because this is to me the real conundrum, right? If 2024 doesn't go well, will the party conclude that it's abortion or Trump? And I say this because if they conclude it's Trump, then it may be another cycle or two.
Well, you know my answer on that.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, that to me seems to be we may be a full decade away from the Republican Party sorting out this issue.
Well, I think the Republican Party has a lot to sort out for a lot of reasons. But I think what we have learned is that there are no more single-issue elections. You have, especially elections that do what happened in 2020 and 2022, which is drive out a lot of younger people, a lot of people who are really motivated by what is happening in the world generally coming out of a pandemic and Roe v. Wade and Donald Trump and all these things happening at the same time. That if Republicans only sort of focus on one issue, that's never going to be the winning message.
And now Democrats have all of these stories about how the impact of not having these abortion protections.
The little girl in Ohio.
The little girl in Ohio. I was with at an event that Dr. Joe Biden, the First Lady, had with these women who had these harrowing stories. You know what I mean? There was people crying throughout as they were talking about, you know, them having a miscarriage and having to leave the hospital because the doctors were scared to do something in Texas when they were having that miscarriage. And so those kinds of stories are going to be what you keep seeing, and I think that moves a lot of people.
And don't sleep on the issue of democracy. I think people still care about the government and its institutions.
They may blink the freedom. Right. Yeah. Jim, what would you tell? You know, it's going to be interesting in these Virginia elections, which are so, you know, if Glenn Youngkin is a national figure, he's got to win control of the state legislature.
Well,
we know Democrats are running on abortion.
He has an abortion problem, too.
Right. I was just going to say, Republicans aren't going to run on abortion, are they? They're going to try to run on something else. How do you, if you don't counter it, I mean, is he just going to try to hope he can education his way out of this?
Yeah, I do. I think he'll concentrate on other issues. And if I were a Republican strategist, which I am, I would be telling my candidates, talk about the economy, stay away from social issues. I mean, they're a loser. All you have to do is look at what Target and Bud Light did, and you realize that there are 50% of people on each side.
View it as a third rail and just stay away?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I tend to be more libertarian as a conservative anyway, so that's where I'm coming from. But, I mean, I just don't think it plays well except for a very minor part of our base.
Well, speaking of mining the base, Eugene, there's all these, we talked about messaging bills that Democrats are doing on abortion. There's all these messaging bills that some Republicans want to do in the House.
Right.
But not Don Bacon, you know, not Nancy, not the ones that actually have to deal with swing voters.
Right. That's what this party has such an issue with, especially in the House. We have folks like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene who want to impeach Joe Biden. They want to do all of these things that their voters aren't thinking about, right? And that you're talking about, you know, social issues being a third rail. These other issues are too, because people will say to you, no matter where you go, we sent them to do something. But there is a small minority that they're listening to in the party that want to see the fighting.
Well, the party was really thinking and had real leadership, Kimberly. The number one story they should be pushing today is not Durham. It's the learning loss.
Right.
Like, this would be right in the wheelhouse of, all these Republican critiques about shutting down schools.
This is an actual education issue. It actually affects not only our children's future, but our position as a nation in the world.
I think it's like not even close to being, I don't think there's another story today that's as important as this one.
But with the base shrinking and people wanting to get a larger share, they're seeing the movement from things like anti-wokeism, and they just can't break from that. They just can't break from it to focus on these other things.
I agree with that completely. It drives me insane.
Well, what's interesting, Jim, is that you see with swing voters, they don't care. They don't even know the Disney fight. But you have DeSantis pushing the anti-Disney stuff, which I believe in a caucus of extremely conservative people, they care about the Disney issue.
Well, exactly. And if you think about it, it's anti-Republican. Republicans are the party of big business.
Or your Republican party.
Well, the old one. Well, that's true. I'm an establishment guy. But we're going after a private company because of the way they feel about a given issue. That's what we used to accuse the Democrats of doing. And it was wrong then. Why isn't it wrong now?
And the national Republicans are making this really difficult for the folks in the states that do want to focus on education or the economy, because they do want to talk about this. Everything DeSantis talks about has to do with these, what used to be third world issues, these social issues. Donald Trump, the same thing. Abortion is in that, and that's all you're hearing from a lot of these Republicans. So it's how do the rest of the party deal with the other issues when the top of the party is dealing with the...
And that gets me to another issue, which is Donald Trump's blotted out the sun. How do you break through if you don't talk about Trump's problems and you're a Republican, Jim?
I think that you need to talk about Trump's problems and the fact that he's lost the last 3 elections for our party. I mean, I don't understand why that's not being discussed. This discussion of pardoning...
It's being discussed and just not being...
carried out.
Yeah, devoured. Yeah. Maybe they don't want to eat that food.
Well,
DeSantis is talking about it.
Well, right. Yeah. Of course, he kind of has to. But you're talking... I mean, this pardoning a guy... I mean, come on, give me a break. That's actually an issue. It has no business being discussed among primary candidates.
You know, Kimberly, I was fascinated that Mike Pence is continues to try to walk this line, right? On one hand, he talks about people stop him and saying, thank you for, doing your job. And on the other hand, well, how do we know the President Trump's guilty yet? Now, he doesn't want to promise a pardon. That's maybe out of principle, but he won't say it.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, I agree with you 100% on the pardon issue, but I'm not sure it's so much, people call it a fear of Trump. It's a fear of the base.
The voters,
it's directly related
Trump,
to what the voters, if they don't think that the voters' sort of Trump fever has broken, they can't stop trying to pander to that as opposed to carve out their own message.
Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, these are all rational people. They see the polls with swing voters. They know they should be doing something different, but they're not. They're afraid of these voters, aren't they?
Well, because they think the Trump base is a guaranteed turnout, for one. Yeah. And swing voters aren't. I had a conversation with a guy, a very close friend from Baltimore, and he actually said to me that we were talking about the presidential, I can't support Ted Cruz next time, no matter what he does. And I said, why not? He said, because he wasn't strong enough supporter of the J6 protesters. And I looked at him, I said, are you out of your mind?
Wow.
The guys who ran into my office and ransacked it.
What you're saying is that's the Republican base.
Yeah.
Wow. Eugene, Kimberly, and Mr. Dornan. Good to see you, my friend. Tomorrow night at 10:30 Eastern, we're going to take a deeper dive into the impact of the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe and its impact on medicine, particularly medical care in rural America, politics, culture, and beyond. Don't miss our special Meet the Press report. Abortion in America, 1 year later, right here at NBC News Now. Up next, the story we just talked about a bit. The nation's troubling report card. I'm going to talk to a former education secretary about the shocking new statistics showing children's math and reading scores plummeting in the post-pandemic learning era. And it's across the board. There are no good stats in this report. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As I was talking about earlier, national test scores hit lows not seen in decades this week, as the National Center for Education Statistics released the results of their assessment today. A report often called the nation's report card on our public education system. This year's study looked at math and reading in 13-year-olds, students who would have been 10 at the beginning of the pandemic. And the results are alarming. When compared to testing done in 2020, average test scores for the nation's 13-year-olds dropped 4 points in reading, a whopping 9 points in math. And the decline in math is the single largest drop the test has seen in half a century. And if you're wondering about different outcomes, there really wasn't much of a difference between high income, low income, rural, urban, and suburban. Joined now by former Secretary of Education and a former superintendent of a huge education system in Chicago, Arne Duncan. Arne, it's good to see you. It's an alarming report. And I really wanted to talk to you about it because you've got experience both on a local level and a national level. You get a report like this. You're the Chicago school superintendent. What are you asking for first?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, Chuck. And this is obviously just has to be hair on fire. And the report is, as you said, incredibly alarming, but there's nothing surprising here. And a couple things. What happened was obviously children lost a tremendous amount of learning time. So what they need is a lot more learning time back. And I'm just not honestly feeling the urgency across the country that we desperately need here. We can't afford to lose a generation of kids. We have 15,000 school districts, as you know, supposed to be laboratories of innovation and local control. My simple question, Chuck, is how many of them canceled summer vacation to help their kids catch up? And I don't know of anybody who did that.
Do you know of a single school system that just said, hey, instead of 180 school days this year, we're going to go to 100. We're going to go to 200 for the next 3 years.
200 or 220 or 240.
Yeah.
And we have to give children that time back. And what's even more alarming, Chuck, is, you know, not just those raw changes, those raw decreases, declines in test scores, but the children who are already the furthest behind it before COVID, they dropped more than twice as much as the kids that were further ahead. So the kids who need the most fell the furthest behind and are getting the least. And this is where it has to be all hands on deck. You know, get rid of summer school, do Saturdays, do after schools. And I worry that school systems, I know these are hard conversations, but I don't think school systems are being honest with parents about how far behind their children are.
No, isn't it the other way around? They're afraid to, I mean, I go back to, we've put such a stigma on, quote, being held back or repeating a year or repeating, maybe you need to repeat second grade math and third grade, but you're ready for third grade verbal, whatever it is. We put such a stigma on it when we know in test scores, sometimes people have to have unlimited time. Doesn't make them any less smart.
Right, and I'm not even talking about holding folks back, just more time, more after school, more Saturdays, more summer. We know what works. High dosage tutoring helps kids catch up. What I worry about is literally tens of millions of kids who may never catch up, Chuck. And so this has to be, you know, for me, it's like a national emergency. And at the local level, the state level, federal level, everybody has to behave very differently. We're sort of like back to business as usual. And I know how difficult, how taxing those COVID times were. But we can't go back to normal because normal is so poorly serving so many. This is a national emergency. We have to treat it as such, and we have to act with that sense of urgency.
And it seems as if just when we need more teachers, we have fewer because for a lot of reasons, you know, you hear about, well, I still need to hire more teachers. And yes, teachers are getting some pay raises here because people realize, well, if you're going to, you got to incentivize in order to get more people to come into the profession. But how much, I mean, where would we surge the resources from? I assume that would be from the federal level?
Well, it's yes, but it's a great question. So you can use teachers and pay them more for summers or whatever, but we can use college students, we can use retired teachers, we can use technology, again, high dosage tutoring in person, on the internet, hybrid, whatever it might be. There are lots of ways to deliver to children exactly what they need. We just haven't had the will. We haven't had the sense of urgency. This is not a
Where should this come from? Because your hair's on fire, which I thought it would be. And, you know, I'm almost self-critical. There's a part of me that was beating myself up for not leading with this story today, right? You know, and making every news organization. We should be leading with this story. But where can we get hair on fire leadership on the political level?
Well, that's a good question. And you need to, again, there's nothing for me, political about public education. Everybody, this is a bipartisan issue. This is a threat to our economy. It's a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our democracy. When folks don't have a chance to fulfill their dreams academically and get good jobs, our democracy, it becomes under threat. And so this is one where across the aisle, everyone, it can't be a one-day story. This report card, yes, came out yesterday, but there are no surprises here. Any of us could have predicted this to be the greatest decline we've seen in decades, and that's exactly what happened. And so folks need to stay focused on it. Anything you're willing to do to keep the story alive and challenge politicians at every level to step up to the plate.
Can you give me one example of anywhere locally that's trying to do something different that you've been intrigued about?
There are districts that in small pilots are helping kids. But again, Chuck, this is tens of millions of children across America. And so for me, this can't be a small pilot here, a small pilot there. This has to be systemically every single child who needs help, and meet them where they are. If they need more math help, give them that. If they need more English help, give them that. They need both. But we can do this on an individualized basis. This is really blocking and tackling. And again, a sense of urgency and courage that our kids need and deserve this.
This is about America's future in the world. This is a national security issue. There's all sorts of ways that this should be framed. Secretary Duncan, also a veteran, a former superintendent of the Chicago school system. Thanks for coming on, sharing your perspective with us. And thank you all for being with us this hour. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.